That morning the entire palace fell silent when the doctor, before ministers and guards, raised his voice coldly. "Your Majesty, your days are numbered. In 40 days, your life will come to an end." The impact was immediate. The Queen collapsed in tears. The generals looked at each other in disbelief, and even the simplest servants felt a chill run down their spines. How could the most powerful man in the kingdom, owner of incalculable riches, be about to lose everything in so little time? Little did they know that this death sentence would be the beginning of something no one would ever forget. The declaration echoed through the ornate walls of the palace like a divine sentence pronounced by the heavens themselves. How was it possible? A man who possessed everything humanity had ever dreamed of, palaces that extended beyond the horizon and disappeared in the morning mist, treasures that surpassed the riches of entire civilizations, political and military power that made entire nations bow in reverence, was completely defenseless before such a short and implacable deadline. For the first time in his life, the king found himself facing something he could not buy, conquer, or command. Death recognized no titles, was not impressed by riches, and feared no armies. What would you do if you discovered you had only 40 days to live? How would you react to knowing that all the power and wealth accumulated over a lifetime had become completely irrelevant before the only absolute certainty of human existence? Our protagonist was not just any king, one of those we know from history books or fairy tales. He was the living symbol of absolute power, a man born with a golden spoon, who grew up believing the entire world was created to serve him. During 45 years of life, he never heard the word no as an answer to any of his desires, and turned every whim into reality through the unlimited power of his position. His banquets lasted entire days and attracted the best chefs from 5 different continents. His clothes were woven with pure gold threads extracted from the deepest mines of his territory, and every step he took echoed through polished marble of palaces built by thousands of artisans who dedicated their entire lives to his glory. But behind all this exterior magnificence, there was a man who had become a prisoner of his own body, a body that had transformed into a prison of flesh and bone built by the excesses of a lifetime. It was a body that had become heavy from endless banquets, slow from the laziness that luxury provides, and progressively sick from systematic disregard for the natural laws of life. He had traded vitality for comfort, health for indulgence, and true happiness for momentary pleasures that power can buy. The palace where he lived was a world apart, isolated from the reality his subjects faced daily. Gardens that extended for kilometers, fountains of crystal water imported from sacred mountains, exotic animals brought from the most remote corners of the earth, and a quantity of servants that exceeded the population of entire cities. Everything was designed to satisfy his desires before he even expressed them, creating a bubble of artificiality that increasingly distanced him from the natural essence of human life. Before we continue this impressive true story, check if you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories are reaching, because this lesson you're about to discover can transform lives anywhere in the world, from large urban centers to the simplest communities. While you write, let me tell you how it all began. How a man who seemed to have everything discovered he actually had nothing of what truly mattered. To understand what was about to happen, you need to know this king's reality. He woke up in silk beds that cost more than entire cities, served by dozens of servants before even getting up. His breakfast was a gastronomic spectacle with delicacies from 5 continents, tropical fruits transported in special ships, wines aged for decades, sweets that took weeks to prepare. But the real tragedy was in the consequence. He had become a slave to his own pleasure. His days were a vicious routine, eating without limit, drinking without measure, resting on golden cushions while others decided important matters. The man who should lead had become a passive spectator of his own life. His body, once strong and active, now weighed like a stone. His legs barely carried him through corridors without him stopping to catch his breath. His chest hurt with every stare, as if his heart protested against the burden of that deteriorated body. His sleep was interrupted by difficult breathing and constant pain. The best doctors in the kingdom examined him regularly, prescribing expensive potions that never had lasting effect. They treated symptoms, but never identified the root cause that was slowly killing the king. This apparently perfect life hid a disease that could not be cured with medicine, only with radical transformation. On a cold autumn morning, the king woke with penetrating chest pain radiating to his left arm. The pain was different, not just physical but touching his very soul. The best specialists from 3 continents were summoned urgently, each examining the monarch knowing their lives depended on the correct diagnosis. They brought sophisticated instruments, rare potions, decades of knowledge. They spent days performing exams, consulting ancient texts, debating through dawn, but their confused faces revealed a terrible truth. They couldn't identify what was wrong. Each specialist had a different theory. The Greek doctor spoke of unbalanced bodily humors. The Persian sage suggested liver problems. The Egyptian healer blamed the stars. Nothing worked. Each day, the king felt weaker and more disconnected. Then came a man no one had called. The guards swore he hadn't passed through the gate. It was as if he had materialized in the gardens. He wore no luxurious robes, nor carried sophisticated instruments. He was simple, wearing modest peasant clothes. But his eyes were different. They shone with ancient wisdom that crossed not just the body but the soul. It was wisdom that didn't come from books, but from direct knowledge about the mysteries of human existence. When he requested private audience, even the most experienced guards stepped away without question. He carried invisible but undeniable authority, not from political titles, but from deep knowledge about life and death. The meeting took place in the royal chamber, away from curious eyes. The mysterious doctor made no protocol courtesies, didn't bow, didn't kiss the royal ring. Instead, he observed the king for long minutes, studying not just his body, but his habits, posture, way of breathing and moving. It was a different examination. No instruments, no physical touch, no questions about symptoms. He seemed to read something much deeper, examining the very essence of the king's life, his history, choices, vices, virtues. The king felt naked before that gaze, as if all his secrets were revealed without saying a word. After silence that seemed eternal, the doctor spoke with calm but implacable voice. "Your Majesty, your disease is not in medical books. It's not a body disease that can be cured with potions. It's a deeper and more dangerous evil than any plague." The king, trying to maintain dignity despite growing fear, asked what the diagnosis would be. The answer came like lightning. "Your Majesty, your disease is the very life you chose to live. Each excessive banquet was a dose of poison. Each day of laziness was a step toward death. Each moment of spiritual disconnection was a brick in building your own tomb. No luxury will save you. Your life will end in exactly 40 days. The silence was deafening. For the first time in life, the king faced something his power couldn't buy, his influence couldn't change, his authority couldn't contest. Death was the only force that wasn't impressed by crowns, nor bowed before scepters. The news spread through the palace like fire. Servants whispered, ministers gathered nervously. The queen, always composed, collapsed in uncontrollable tears. The princes despaired, processing that in 40 days they would be orphans and heirs simultaneously. The entire court panicked. How was it possible that the most powerful man in the kingdom, who controlled life and death of millions, was defenseless before his own death? How could someone who commanded armies, signed treaties that changed nations' destinies, accumulated wealth to buy entire kingdoms, be so vulnerable before such an implacable deadline? The king discovered there was a force in the universe that didn't recognize his power, wouldn't bend to his will, and couldn't be corrupted by all his wealth. For the first time, he faced something truly absolute and inescapable. The first days after diagnosis were marked by such radical transformation, they seemed to belong to a completely different reality from what the kingdom had known. The palace, always a center of celebration, music, and joy, transformed into a silent mausoleum where each step echoed as a reminder of approaching death. The king, who before devoured entire banquets that would feed entire families for months, now couldn't swallow even a grain of rice without his stomach rebelling. Food, once his greatest passion and pleasure, now caused nausea just by looking, as if his body had developed instinctive aversion to everything that once tempted him. Nights became endless and torturous vigils, where sleep fled like a sneaky thief, leaving only the constant echo of countdown hammering in his mind like a funeral bell. 39 days, 38 days, 37 days. Each decreasing number seemed to remove a layer of hope, a possibility of escaping the destiny announced to him. The king discovered that time, which seemed infinite when you have power and wealth, actually moved with terrifying speed when you have a final deadline. During these first dark days, the king experienced for the first time in his life the bitter taste of total powerlessness. He desperately tried to use all resources that always worked to solve his problems. He offered astronomical fortunes to doctors from distant lands, promised entire kingdoms to anyone who could save him, sent messengers to the four corners of the known world seeking miraculous healers. But each attempt ended in the same implacable reality. The diagnosis remained unchanged, the deadline kept running, and death approached with the inevitability of sunrise. But then something extraordinary and completely unexpected began to happen, something that would change not just the course of this story, but the very nature of the man living these final moments. Taken by an impulse he couldn't understand or explain, an impulse that seemed to come from a part of his soul long dormant, the king began doing things that shocked the entire court and confused all his counselors. He ordered, to the total amazement of his treasurers, that the royal coffers be completely opened, coffers containing treasures accumulated by generations of kings and pure gold coins distributed among the poor living around the palace. These weren't small symbolic alms, but amounts that changed entire lives. Families living in extreme poverty suddenly received enough to buy land, build houses, and guarantee sustenance for years. Jewels belonging to the royal family for generations, unique pieces created by history's best artisans, were donated to orphanages to be sold and converted into food, clothing, and education for abandoned children. Treasures exhibited as symbols of power and status, objects shown to impress visitors and demonstrate the kingdom's grandeur, were delivered to hospitals to be transformed into medical treatments for the sick without resources. It was as if he was systematically divesting himself of everything he once considered important, preparing his soul for a journey from which he could take nothing material. But something deeper was happening than simple preparation for death. It was as if, for the first time in his life, he was discovering the true pleasure that comes from giving instead of receiving, serving instead of being served, blessing instead of accumulating. On the 10th day of countdown, something surprising happened. The king, who for 15 years hadn't walked more than meters within his own room, made a decision that alarmed his guards. He decided to go out to the palace garden, not in a litter carried by servants or accompanied by ministers, but alone on foot, wearing simple peasant clothes. His servants were confused. Why abandon security and comfort? Was it a sign the disease had affected his mind? But the king gave no explanations, simply walked to the gardens following an internal call he couldn't ignore. For the first time in 20 years, he felt the sun touching his face directly, without protection from golden awnings or ornate parasols. The sensation was almost shocking. He had forgotten how the sun's warmth could be comforting, how natural light awakened energies he didn't know he possessed. Fresh air, not filtered by expensive incense, entered his lungs in a way forgotten for decades. That walk of hesitant minutes transformed into hours of exploration. He discovered corners of his own kingdom he hadn't visited for years. He saw wild flowers growing naturally among ornamental plants, simple flowers with authentic beauty that rare roses didn't possess. He heard for the first time in decades the genuine song of birds, not exotic ones raised in golden cages, but free ones flying over his kingdom, singing simply by nature. The sound was different, purer, more full of life than any music from his private orchestras. He felt for the first time in adult life the real texture of earth under bare feet. Earth not polished, not covered by Persian rugs, but simple and honest that sustains all life. There was something deeply reconnecting, as if remembering a fundamental part of being human, lost in so much artificial luxury. It was like waking from a long and artificial dream, rediscovering simple but satisfying sensations that luxury had erased. Each barefoot step on grass, each natural breeze, each genuine sound of nature removed layers of artificiality accumulated over decades. The courtiers watched intrigued. Was this radical change just desperation of a man preparing to die, or real transformation no one had foreseen? They didn't understand that the king wasn't behaving like someone preparing to die, but like someone learning, for the first time in decades, how to truly live. Day after day, the walks became longer and more revealing. He began venturing beyond formal gardens, exploring areas for workers and servants. For the first time, he genuinely conversed with gardeners, guards, cooks, not protocol conversations, but real dialogues where he asked questions and truly listened. He heard real stories of daily struggle, personal sacrifice, genuine gratitude for small things like hot meal after hard work, dry roof during storm, honest work that sustains family. These conversations awakened perception that luxury had anesthetized, True wealth wasn't in accumulated treasures, but in simple and authentic experiences, real connections with people, gratitude for basic blessings of existence. As days passed, the transformation deepened unexpectedly. The man who considered prayer a tedious formal obligation began spending hours in genuine spiritual contemplation. His spiritual search no longer happened in luxurious chapels decorated with gold and precious stones, where even prayer seemed like visual spectacle. He chose a simple, small room in the palace's least noble corner, space he prepared only with humble mat and window to the garden, where he discovered simplicity's beauty. In this stripped space, without golden distractions, he discovered prayer became something completely different. It was no longer performance or empty ritual, but real and intimate conversation with the divine. For the first time, he felt genuine connection with something greater than himself, presence that wasn't impressed by titles or riches, but responded to human heart sincerity. Fasting, unthinkable for someone accustomed to 5 daily banquets, became strangely liberating practice. He discovered that when the body wasn't occupied with heavy digestion of excessive foods, mind became dramatically clearer, heart more serene, spiritual perception more acute. During fasts, he experienced consciousness states never known. There were moments of extraordinary mental clarity where he saw his entire life from completely new perspective. He began understanding, with painful but liberating lucidity, that he'd systematically confused momentary pleasure with lasting happiness, physical comfort with true inner peace, material possession with real security. He realized he'd spent decades chasing shadows, accumulating things that didn't satisfy his soul, building life impressive on outside, but completely empty inside. Each perception was like veil removed from eyes, revealing truths always present, but invisible when blinded by excesses and distractions. The most shocking change was when he decided to completely leave the palace and walk through kingdom streets, not in golden carriages surrounded by guards, but on foot, wearing simple clothes, conversing directly with subjects. This decision caused panic among security advisors. Never had a monarch exposed himself this way. But the king, for the first time, wasn't interested in protocols or traditions. He'd discovered spiritual hunger that could only be satisfied through genuine human contact and selfless service. He visited asylums where abandoned elderly spent last days in solitude. There he not only distributed money, but sat on floor, heard stories, held trembling hands, personally helped feed them. He went to orphanages where children grew up without hope, and there he not only donated resources, but played on floor, told stories, experienced pure joy of seeing genuine smiles. He spent time in hospitals offering comfort to patients, fighting diseases, people facing their own fears about mortality. Strangely, by offering comfort to others who suffered, he discovered his own fear of death diminished, replaced by deeper understanding about life's real meaning. The people were astonished by the transformation. They'd never seen a monarch like this, humble without being weak, present without being invasive, genuinely interested without seeking return. They wondered, is our king saying goodbye to us? Why such radical change when he has little time? What they didn't know was that the king wasn't preparing to die, but learning, for the first time in 45 years, how to truly live with purpose. The morning of the 40th day arrived wrapped in dense tension that could be felt in the air of every palace corridor. Since before dawn, nervous courtiers, worried ministers, experienced generals, and even kings from neighboring nations gathered in the great hall for collective vigil. No one knew how it would end. The hall, normally celebration space, had transformed into solemn cathedral where hundreds awaited in silence the fulfillment of prophecy that had completely changed the kingdom's dynamics. The marble columns seemed like sentinels, witnessing moment that would enter history. The silence was heavy as lead, charged with anxiety, fear, curiosity, and strange expectation, mixing terror and fascination. Everyone knew this would be their king's last day of life, end of an era, beginning of transition that would forever change everything they knew. The queen, always model of elegance, was dressed in black, symbolic preparation for approaching mourning. Despite years of training in emotional control, she couldn't contain tears flowing silently, sprouting like inexhaustible fountain of anticipated pain. The princes remained heads down, processing that in hours they would simultaneously become devastated orphans and heirs burdened with responsibilities they didn't feel prepared to assume. The court doctors waited nervously, knowing they would witness something challenging, everything they'd learned about medicine and human life's limits. Would this be the moment their limitations were dramatically exposed? Even the mysterious doctor was present, positioned where he could observe everything without drawing attention. His face remained serene, but eyes shone with deep knowledge, as if knowing something everyone ignored, watching unfold of greater plans set in motion 40 days before. Hours passed with torturous slowness. Noon came and passed without incidents. Afternoon advanced, each hour marked by bells echoing like inexorable countdown. Strangely, there was no sign the king suffered physically or weakened. On the contrary, and this confused all present, he seemed more alert, present, conscious, paradoxically more alive than many remembered. Erect and dignified posture, eyes shining with clarity absent for long time, serenity contrasting dramatically with panic dominating rest of court. When sun began final descent, painting sky with golden tones creating almost supernatural atmosphere, everyone collectively held breath. Would it be in these last moments that sentence would be fulfilled? Tension became almost unbearable. Hearts beat rapidly, hands trembled, all eyes fixed on King, expecting sign that end approached. But as final minutes flowed, something completely unexpected began becoming evident. Then, precisely when the last golden rays of sun disappeared on horizon, and first stars began shining, officially marking the 40th day's end, something absolutely extraordinary happened. Instead of witnessing dying man, entire court saw something defying their expectations about life, death, and human destiny. The king rose from his throne with energy and vitality he hadn't shown for more than a decade. He wasn't just alive, he was literally radiant, as if interior light extinguished for years had been rekindled. It was as if the 40 days everyone expected to be his last had actually been the first days of completely new life. His skin, previously pale and flaccid from decades of excess, now had healthy color radiating vitality. His eyes, opaque from sedentary life, shone with intensity and clarity. There was in them light of wisdom gained through transforming experience, not theoretical wisdom, but practical, from someone who'd undergone complete interior revolution. His body had undergone visible transformation. He'd lost all excessive weight carried for more than 15 years, but didn't seem weak. On contrary, seemed strong, agile, and energized as no one remembered. It was as if he'd undergone complete cellular renewal, born again in rejuvenated body. The court remained in absolute silence, processing what they saw. There was something almost supernatural in transformation, but at the same time profoundly natural, as if witnessing logical result of natural laws set in motion during previous 40 days. Then, the mysterious doctor approached Hall's center. His steps echoed in silence, and everyone awaited explanation for inexplicable. Before astonished court, he made declaration that would forever change how they understood life, death, health, and human transformation. Your Majesty, your life was never condemned to physical death. What was dying was your soul imprisoned by excesses, by selfishness, by disconnection from existence's true nature. Fear of death was remedy Allah used to cure your life. In last 40 days, you didn't prepare to die. You learned, finally, how to truly live. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't fear or sadness, but deep comprehension installing in minds confronted with revolutionary truth. The doctor continued, the disease was never physical body, though manifesting through symptoms. It was spirit disease, soul sickness, disconnection from laws governing healthy existence. Gluttony poisoned your blood with toxins no medicine could neutralize because they were renewed daily. Laziness paralyzed your vital energy. Spiritual disconnection dried your interior life source. He paused before continuing. When you changed destructive habits, returned to natural simplicity, reconnected with purpose through service to others, Allah changed your destiny. Death sentence transformed into life prescription. Words echoed through Hall like waves, awakening, transforming perceptions. Court witnessed not just one man's cure, but lesson about fundamental laws of health and human realization. The deep silence that followed was different from any other. It was sacred silence of comprehension, installing in minds confronted with fundamental and revolutionary truth. One by one, nobles began processing what they witnessed. What seemed terrible curse had been greatest gift. Death sentence had transformed into life prescription. Destructive fear had become creative force. The queen, who cried 40 days preparing for widowhood, now cried tears of deep joy. She wasn't just recovering husband, but discovering completely new and transformed man. Princes contemplated not just father returned from death, but renewed father. They witnessed life lesson they'd carry forever. Never too late for radical transformation. True power comes from discipline. True wealth lies in health and spiritual connection. Court doctors learned most powerful cure doesn't come from external medicine, but from complete transformation of living way. Human body possesses regeneration capacity, transcending their studies, activated only through fundamental changes. Impact extended beyond palace. King's resurrection spread through kingdom. People who'd witnessed his transformation, from excessive ruler to humble man walking among them, understood they'd witnessed lesson about how to live. Story became legend, and teaching passed through generations. Parents told about king who discovered true wealth wasn't in coffers, but in health and capacity to serve. Transformation planted reflection seeds that grew like silent revolution. This story teaches transforming truth. King's disease wasn't in his body, but in his soul. Daily choices, disconnection from essential values. Excesses were invisible prisons distancing him from vitality and spiritual realization. When he changed heart through concrete actions, simplicity, service to others, gratitude, discipline, Allah changed his destiny. Lesson is relevant. How often do we confuse momentary pleasure with lasting happiness? Do we neglect physical, mental, and spiritual health for pleasures that harm us? King discovered discipline isn't punishment, but liberation. Fasting isn't deprivation, but purification. Simplicity isn't poverty, but true wealth, allowing us to appreciate genuine blessings. You reading this story reflect. Is there excess in your life confused with blessing, but functioning as subtle prison? Is there postponed transformation? Story demonstrates never too late for radical change, but sometimes we need shock to awaken. Transformation needn't wait for external crisis. Can begin today, examining habits, identifying what serves and what limits, making consistent adjustments for healthier and more balanced life. Share this story so more people learn that conscious discipline, genuine faith, and intentional simplicity can change any sentence. Wisdom only has value when shared, becoming hope and inspiration for others. Your transformation can begin today. No need to wait for 40-day sentence. Moment is now, choice is yours, and transformation power is in your hands, awaiting your decision to use it with wisdom and determination.